Welcome back to Introduction to Machine Learning. I'm Ludwig Botmann, and in this video I will tell you about proximities and random forests. First, we have to understand how random forests can be used to define proximities, and then we want to learn about how these proximities can be used and for which use cases these can be used. So first, about computing these proximities. So the goal is to compute proximities between observations. Okay, so you have an observation xi and an observation xj, and you want to know how far they are away from each other or how near they are to each other. So here we look at two IDs, 1 and 2, and at the features of these observations. So we are not looking at the target variables, but just at the features. So in this case, color, form, and length. And what we do here is that first we train a random forest, and after training we push all observations through each tree. So we push observation 1 through tree 1, tree 2 and tree 3, and the same for observation 2 goes through all 3 trees. And then we just compare the predictions of each of all these trees, and we count how many times a tree predicts the same class for those 2 observations. So in this case, tree 1 predicts different target variables for observation 1 and 2, but trees 2 and 3 predict the same value. Okay, so in 2 or 3 cases they have the same value, so the proximity of these 2 observations is 2 divided by 3. Now we can do this for all the observations in a data set, so we have n observations in a data set, so we get n times n, or a matrix with n times n entries, which is of course a symmetric matrix because x1 and x2 have the same proximity as x2 and x1. Sure. What can we do with these proximities? First, we can try to just visualize the data set that we have. So usually a data set has more than just 2 variables, so it's hard to have a good plot of this data set because you have too many dimensions to fit on a screen or on a paper. So what we can do is we compute this proximity matrix. So each row and each column of this proximity matrix refer to one observation. Of course, one observation is always perfectly to itself, but others are perhaps not. And then we can use this proximity matrix. Perhaps first we have to take the inverse to compute distances, but then we can visualize these distances. For example, what we see here is that, the 3 classes of this penguin dataset, Ardelia, Chinstrap, and Gen2, can be seen here from this plot. But what we also see is that, for example, this class Ardelia has a rather high in-class variance, so values are in this area, as opposed to Gen2, which are perhaps not that diverse inside the class. Okay, so we have perhaps learn something about the data set. And we also see that, these 2 classes and also the 3rd class overlap with each other, which perhaps will make it challenging to train a good classification model. Right? Also, using this visualization, we can locate outliers. For example, this point over here belongs to the class Chinstrap, but it's quite far away from all the other observations, so yeah, it's a perhaps untypical data point of this class. We could also use this to have a look for mislabeled data points. This can also happen, especially in manually labeled data sets or data set where the target variable is defined by a human inspector somehow. So we have this, I guess, a lot in, for example, medical contexts or other computer vision tasks where people are asked to label images. So perhaps they also commit errors, and perhaps we can see some of these mislabeled data points with these proximity visualizations as well. As third use case of these proximities is the imputation of missing data points. So let's say we have this data set here with 4 columns, color, form, origin, length, or 4 features, and we have missing variables, this one and that one, and or missing observations here. And what we could do, of course, is to replace all these missings with the median of each column. Okay, so that's totally fine. We can compute that. Here we did that, so we just imputed those 2 observations with the median of these 2 observations, which is brown and 14 in these 2 cases. And now that we have a data set without missing values, we can compute the proximities. Okay? So we have to do some imputation first to compute the missing values, but yeah, now we can do this. That's the second step. Now we've computed the proximities after the data set has changed, and now we can replace the missings by a weighted average of the non-missings. So let's say we look at the column length here and remember that this observation was missing beforehand. So after imputing the median of all the missing values, we can compute the proximities. And for example, the third observation and the second observation seem to be not that far away. So we take a weighted average of 14, 19 and 14, but 19 gets a high weight because this proximity between these 2 observations is rather high. Okay. So we could say we are done, but because we computed the proximities on a rather undercomplex imputation by just imputing the median, perhaps we can do this again and again to get rid of this undercomplex imputation and have this kind of better imputation with the weighted average using proximities in a random forest.